A 3-judge appellate court panel in the Fifth Circuit issued a decision ending the ability of the medication abortion pill Mifepristone to be received through the mail, amongst other things. Now, one of those judges is being called out for receiving payments from the group that brought the case in the first place. And we'll get into more on that later. But first, let's discuss what this ruling means for abortion rights. From AP News, the decision by 3 judges on the 5th US Circuit Court of Appeals in New Orleans overturned part of a lower court ruling that would have revoked the FDA's 23-year-old approval of Mifepristone, but it left intact part of the ruling that would end the availability of the drug by mail, allow it to be used through only the 7th week of pregnancy rather than the 10th, and require that it be administered in the presence of a physician. Now, I really want to highlight that administered in the presence of a physician portion, because Mifepristone is safer than Tylenol and Viagra. So when you have to ask yourself, what is the difference between Mifepristone and Tylenol and Viagra? One is specifically a medication for abortion and particularly covers women's reproductive health, and the others are not. So there is a massive difference in the way that they are treating this medication than they would more dangerous medications. So keep that in mind. And also, this type of judicial overreach into the FDA is completely unheard of. And more on that from AP News. There is virtually no precedent for a US court overturning the approval of a drug that the FDA has deemed safe and effective. While new drug safety issues often emerge after FDA approval, the agency is required to monitor medicines on the market, evaluate emerging issues, and take action to protect US patients. Congress delegated that responsibility to the FDA, not the courts, more than a century ago. And it's intuitive, because who would you rather be making these decisions? The experts or judges who have no particular expertise in these areas? The answer is clear. Now, the Biden administration does plan on appealing the decision, which means that if SCOTUS decides to take it up, they would be the ones who make the final decision. Jennifer Salvin of the ACLU highlighted how this decision and the potential decision of the Supreme Court will harm abortion seekers in an online press conference. She had this to say: if the Supreme Court affirms this decision, it will prevent patients from receiving their medication in the mail in all 50 states in the nation. That means that patients will have to travel often hundreds of miles, especially if they're coming from a state that has banned abortion, for the sole purpose of picking up a pill. So there's that, but now let's shift our focus to one judge, namely James Ho. He wrote a concurring opinion, which means he agreed with the outcome of the court, but came to that conclusion in a different way. In fact, Ho believed that Mifepristone should be banned entirely. And to give you an idea what heinous and idiotic things this man believes, here's an excerpt from his concurring opinion. I'll read it in part. It says, it's well established that if a plaintiff has concrete plans to visit an animal's habitat and view that animal, the plaintiff suffers aesthetic injury when an agency has approved a project that threatens the animal. I'll just say, as someone who's gone to law school, graduated law school, it's well established that using that term of phrase in legal writing is absolutely not proper. That was a really long 1-sentence paragraph that any legal writing professor at any law school would wallop their student upside the head for writing, but I digress. The actual content of what he said in this next paragraph is so much worse than any error he had in his writing. It says this: unborn babies are a source of profound joy for those who view them. Expectant parents eagerly share ultrasound photos with loved ones. Friends and family cheer at the sight of an unborn child. Doctors delight in working with their unborn patients and experience an aesthetic injury when they are aborted. Cenk, my blood is boiling. An aesthetic injury because they don't get to delight in seeing ultrasound photos.
Okay, so let's talk about activist judges, because remember how we got into this? They Roe v. Wade, and the right wing has been saying now for decades, a bunch of activist judges decided that abortion was legal and banning it was unconstitutional because It was in the right to privacy in the Constitution, and they talked about 3 trimesters and how you can't get it in the 3rd trimester, but you can in the first 2, in the state's interest, etc. And they said that was too activist. I actually have a lot of sympathy for that argument, and I've said that many times on the show. So now let's look at this case and see if we could find an activist judge. So somehow it's in the Constitution that Mifepristone is okay to be approved by the FDA, but only for 7 weeks and not 10 weeks. Really? Where in the Constitution does it say that? And then on top of that, you can approve it, but a doctor has to be present. Where in the Constitution does it say that? You can approve it, but you can't send it by mail. Where? Is it in one of the amendments? Is it in one of the articles? Where is it in the Constitution? No, they're just making this up, 100%. And then you ask, wait, what is the state's interest in this at all? And he comes up with that beauty, man. Well, I think ultrasound pictures are cute. So the state has an interest in aesthetic injuries suffered if you don't see the ultrasound picture, and that's why we're gonna make you have a baby against your will. Are you serious? This is like full-blown 3-ring circus clown. And we haven't even gotten to his corruption yet. Yet this is, now we're having, look, in the old days, politicians are full of crap. One guy would say something that was halfway true and halfway lie. The other guy would say a full lie, and we'd have debates over that. Now, idiocy has permeated into the judiciary, and we're not just having, intellectual conversations that disguise their actual political motive, which is what judges have been doing for a long, long time. Now we've got morons on the bench going like, I like little baby pictures, and that's an aesthetic injury. And I think that it's not activist to say 7 weeks, but not 10 weeks. Do it, but don't do it by mail. Make sure there's a blah, 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 blah. Get out of here, man. It's a conservative court. 3 of them are appointed by Trump, 1 appointed by George W. Bush. They don't care about the law at all. It's totally unprecedented to say that an executive agency is going to be overruled by the courts in this way. They're just saying this is our political opinion and we're gonna write it as if it's law. And us complaining about activist judges our whole lives, we were full of crap as always. We didn't mean a word of it.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned it, but this guy, James Ho, he was a Trump appointed judge. And so I think Rayvana and I were talking about it earlier in the show, or before the show started. I live in Texas, so I think I'm just used to just being disappointed all the time by the things that my state government does, especially when it comes to things like abortion rights and just women's healthcare in general, I should say, not even specific to anybody, but it's always disappointing. And all these rulings that they come out with, they always feel so arbitrary, right? 7 weeks versus 10, whatever kind of rules that they have that they put in place, they just pull them out of their whats. And it's like they just want to make things more inconvenient for people so that we just give up trying to get any of the things done. They do it to us with healthcare, they do it to us with voting, all kinds of things here. So I'm used to being disappointed. I don't really expect any kind of good thing to happen in my state in particular. So whenever I read about rulings like this one, I'm just like kind of numb to it, which is very sad because how old am I? I'm 34 years old right now, almost 35. If I was gonna have a child, it would be now, right? At this stage in my life. But for some reason, all these Republicans are influencing my personal decision as to whether or not I wanna have a kid right now. And it doesn't make any sense to me. It's so wild to me that all this stuff is happening, and it just so happens to be at a time that's critical, not just for me, but for a lot of other people. They're taking that whole decision, which is my life decision, and taking it out of my hands and out of the hands of so many other people just like myself. And it really, it's hard to wrap your head around in a lot of ways. And I've told my fiance, if I have a kid, we gotta move. I have to do it outside of Texas. I don't wanna have a child in my home state. This is where I live. I would have to uproot my entire life, but this is such a major decision and they're not gonna let me make it for myself. So there is a very personal aspect to all of these stories that we cover, except, it's easy to get very upset about it in principle, in theory, but it really, all these stories affect actual people's lives. And I think it's important all the time to just come back to it and remember that. And also, I'm gonna make a plug to vote in your local elections. You vote for judges, you vote for people like this in a lot of different ways. You vote for people on the courts. You gotta vote in local elections because this is how it affects you, right? A lot of people only vote for the president They think that that matters the most. It does, but local is what's gonna get you. That's what you're gonna feel the most.
Right. And it becomes even more frustrating, particularly at the federal level, because we don't have that sort of direct say over our judges, which is why it's even more imperative to make sure that you're doing that at the state, local level. But it becomes even more frustrating when you realize that in some cases, these decisions are being made by these judges for money, because there's a really strong argument to be made that Judge Ho should never have heard this case at all and absolutely should have recused himself. And the Lever did some excellent reporting on this. They reported that James Ho did not recuse himself from the case, even though his wife, Allison Ho, has regularly participated in events with and accepted speaking fees from the Alliance Defending Freedom, the conservative Christian legal group whose lawyers argued the Mifepristone case before his court, according to the judge's financial disclosures. And that name, Alliance Defending Freedom, might sound familiar to a lot of you, because just last Friday, we covered a story where a judge ordered lawyers to attend the organization's explicitly Christian religious freedom training. Now, the ADF is also the organization that brought the anti-LGBTQ SCOTUS case about designing a website for a theoretical gay couple that never even existed or was getting married. And they were also involved in the Dobbs decision as well. So let's get more into how she was making this money from the ADF. James Ho's financial disclosures show that Allison Ho, a top appellate lawyer at the multinational law firm Gibson Dunn, participated in events with the Alliance Defending Freedom and accepted honoraria or speaking fees every year between 2018 and 2021. The group also paid her travel expenses for some events. The judge's 2022 financial disclosures is not available. So this could have been as recently as last year. We don't know that yet. But it continues on. Allison Ho was paid $3,000 in 2020 for an event listed as the Alliance Defending Freedom Academy, and received $1,000 for another Alliance Defending Freedom event in 2021, according to this disclosure. So this was exceptionally recent. I think it's important to point out that Judge Ho wasn't technically required to recuse himself, although any person with half a brain can tell you that there is impropriety, at least the appearance of impropriety, happening there. But and it doesn't mean just because he didn't technically have to do it that we can't highlight how grossly and obviously wrong this is. Now, from that article, the bottom line is that any entity that is putting money in your spouse's bank account raises a potential for impropriety if you sit on, one of those cases, said Gabe Roth, executive director of Fix the Court, a watchdog group that advocates for federal court reform. The money was put there in the last couple of years. It's not like that's easily forgettable. And because, as Cenk always says, this is the fairest show in America, Judge Ho did defend himself. So I will read that for you all. James Ho told the Lever in an email, I consulted the judiciary's ethics advisor prior to sitting in the case and was advised that there was no basis for recusal. In any event, Allison's practice is to donate honoraria to charity. Cenk, I'll say, I don't give a damn. I don't give a damn if she donates the money, which we don't know if that's true or not. I don't give a damn if there wasn't a technical basis for recusal. Everyone knows that there is impropriety happening here. I mean, I don't care. This guy was gonna probably rule this way on this case regardless, but it just is logical that if you are getting money from the organization that's bringing the case, you don't get to make the decision on that case.
Yeah, it's really a no-brainer, but the courts are totally out of control now. There's no accountability. Because guys, look, in this case, do I think that he ruled that way just because his wife got $3,000 in travel a couple of different times? No, as Ray pointed out, I think he was going to rule that way anyway. He's a knucklehead. And she's at Gibson Dunn, which is a huge law firm, which means she makes a lot of money. That $3,000 is probably not going to sway her. But that's not the point, guys. The point is they got a case in front of you and they've put money into your bank account. No, we can't have that. That's obviously the appearance of impropriety. I don't know if you're affected by $3,000 and fancy travel, but it doesn't matter. You shouldn't allow that to happen because it looks like corruption. And since they're both mega conservatives, him and his wife, You don't need it. You don't need that corruption. You don't need the appearance of corruption, but they do it anyway. And there's no accountability. Nothing will happen to that guy. Nothing's gonna happen to Clarence Thomas and the guys on the Supreme Court. And the Clarence Thomas situation is so much worse because his wife is just paid her entire salary, a very large salary, by people that come in front of Clarence Thomas all the time and he doesn't recuse himself. Basically, conservatives, whether it's at the presidential level or at the judiciary level now, are saying ethics are irrelevant. We don't care about your values or your ethics or the appearance of corruption or corruption itself. We don't care. We think we're above the law. We're gonna break any law we like and any code that we like because we're Republicans.
Yeah, I mean, you said the courts are out of control. That was all by design. We saw the GOP stacking the courts around the country for years leading up to this. We saw all those Trump-appointed judges, people who had very, very, very little experience actually judging cases and actually working in law and in the legal system. And now they have positions of authority, of power across the entire country. Small towns, big cities, wherever, they're in power, they're in control. So everything is rigged, right? If you want to talk about conspiracies, it's proven. You can look it up. We have the evidence. We saw that it was happening. And even just look at the Supreme Court. You can see it there, plain as day for everyone to see. And it sucks that we are stuck with all these rulings that these people have put upon us, right? And the Republicans love to do this whenever they want to pass something that is unethical or even unpopular, or maybe doesn't have as much of a legal ground as they would like for it to have. They just kind of play the game and game the system and make sure that all of these ideas, regardless of how popular they are in this supposedly democratic country, are put upon a people who doesn't want them, right? If you look around the world, you always see this minority ruling the majority, and that's very much what's happening here in this country, but it's less obvious than you would see in a lot of other countries, right? We here in the United States like to think that we're immune to things like that. We like to think that we're immune to corruption. We like to think of ourselves as very ethical people, right? Because we're a Christian nation and we rule based on Christian values or whatever it is that the GOP is telling their people that they do. But the reality, and we know it, and this has always been the case, this isn't anything new. The reality is that we are not ethical. We do whatever we want, and we do it whether or not we even have a good justification for it. Even from James Ho, what he was saying, his explanation for why he ruled the way he did, it wasn't even good. What did he call it? Aesthetic value or whatever. It doesn't even make sense, right? He didn't even have a good way to justify his own ruling.
Yeah, last quick thing here, guys. Republicans, think about shoe on the other foot. Imagine if George Soros gave his wife the $3,000 and paid for her travel over and over again. Imagine if George Soros paid a huge salary to the spouse of not Clarence Thomas, but Sotomayor, or one of the liberal justices. What would you guys think? You would definitely think that there was at least, at a bare minimum, the appearance of corruption. You can't even pretend that you wouldn't think that. And obviously that's also true when it applies to conservative justices. Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.